Hello and welcome to episode 91 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amalith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Nice to talk to you all again. Welcome back, Andy.
Thanks.
So to remind people, you work on Element, the Matrix client.
That's right.
Which is a relatively big project. And so today we're going to talk about managing contributions to an open source project. And something we touched on last time you were here was managing contributions from contributors with varying levels of experience. So what about that is challenging then?
It's slightly weird for me because I spent my whole life working on like individual projects where I was desperately trying to get people involved. And then I finally managed to get into working on a really big project. And suddenly I almost have the opposite problem. We've got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of interest in the project. And there's also quite a lot of people who want to help out. But finding time to give people the attention that they need is really difficult. And you need to like make judgments about how much time someone actually needs from you and whether you can afford to give it and what help would be helpful and what would be unhelpful. And especially like some of the contributions are basically spam. You know, we have literal spam getting dumped in our repo, but we also get people who are kind of not really serious about contributing at all through to people who, if you look after them, could become this incredibly valuable contributor who, by the way, is contributing their time for free to your project, which is like a commercially backed project. So if you handle it wrong, you're wasting a massive amount of value, but it's almost always a distraction from what you're doing right now. So managing the time and I guess managing the guilt as well, because you often feel like I didn't look after that person the way I should have done, or what they're doing just doesn't quite mesh with what we're trying to achieve.
And how do you know if it's going to be a person who is going to be a valuable contributor who just needs a bit of time and mentoring versus someone who is just going to be a time waster? That must be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it's impossible. It's impossible because people engage with the project in ways that seem like this person is not engaging seriously. And then it turns out that they're 12, right? And they're a genius, but when they enter a room, they say something stupid, right? But that doesn't mean they're not a genius. So it does take a little bit of investment of time, even to have any clue. And if they are a genius, by the way, they probably have no idea how your code works or how things are done in this technology or whatever. So even if they are a genius, do you have the time to invest in helping them get up to speed with your project?
Yeah, I could say that's something that I've also struggled with on a few of my open source projects. There's some that have quite a few contributions. And one of the things I found most difficult, at least in the early days, just like you, Andy, I wanted to accept as much as I could, I'll get all the contributors I could. I was really focused on trying to get my project out there and get it used by people. As the project grew, though, more and more people were contributing naturally. And then there was a distinct shift when people would show up and want something done, and maybe they want it done for the company. Maybe they want it done for themselves or their own personal bug or feature. But additionally, sometimes they would show up and ask for something to work on just because they wanted to be involved in the project. And there was a shift where I had to say, I can't help everyone and I can't do all of the features and all of the bugs. You have to learn to say no to certain things and when it's appropriate to say no. And what I found worked best for me, at least in my project was orders of magnitude smaller than Element, but allowing someone to dig into the work themselves at first. And then only those people that you really started to dig in, those are the ones that seem to be most helpful later on because they were willing to put in that effort up front rather than, it sounds bad, like they wanted hand-holding all the way. That was a lot harder to deal with because it requires a lot more time and mentorship. And there are people where, when they're up front and say, hey, I'm new and I would really like to get involved with this, we can offer some help. But most often I found it was helpful to point them in the right direction, say, hey, these issues would be good first issues, this section of the code is probably where you want to look, and then kind of leave them to their own devices until they could come back with some tangible questions or maybe even a small implementation. And then it's easier to kind of walk them through certain parts. But it's a sticky problem.
If people pop up and immediately need you to walk them through something, normally that's the pattern of the whole of the rest of the engagement. So if you start off really helping someone in that kind of situation, you know that in a week or 2 weeks, there's going to come a point where you say, I'm sorry, I just don't have time to keep walking you through stuff. So it's not going to work out anyway. So in a way, it's better to just up front give them enough direction that they can find what they need. And if they don't want to take that, then it's probably not going to work out.
Are you telling me you just say RTFM?
Well, actually, the thing that struck me when Kevin was talking actually was that I have like real social anxiety about all of my online interactions, and I really want to have like treated people well. And so I really hate anything that feels like a kind of shrug off like that. But there's a little bit of, not RTFM, but have a look in this file and you should find a similar thing to what you're trying to do. Or have a look at this bug. Maybe that would be a good one to start with.
Yeah, or to have a look through the repo, look at the style of code. This is how we do it.
Definitely. And so it really helps if you've got a pull request that is completely out of line with your standards, it really helps to have it written down somewhere. No one goes and finds it up front, or some people do, but a lot of people don't. But if you can point them at a thing saying, this was already written down, that you should have done it like this, that kind of time wasting, you can just let them work it out.
I've also found that using a lot of the automated tooling, whether it be make or a command runner like Just or anything else, those types of tooling to do all of the kind of automatic checking, whether it be small things like typos, but code formatting, linting, all that sort of stuff, which feels not super useful in maybe production code base that you use at work because it might just get in the way at certain aspects. For something like open source, it actually does really help because it helps the consistency when you have a bunch of different developers from all different backgrounds, different skill levels, different experience levels, different sets of time that they can commit. Those things really, really help. Or they're more helpful in those scenarios than they might be in something where, cohesive team that's working on a problem day in and day out at work together. So spending a little bit of time on those types of things has really helped some open source projects as well.
Isn't that throwing technology at a people problem, though?
I think it could be viewed that way. I would say maybe that's an uncharitable take to it, but I also agree. Very much like Andy, I feel very bad when I have a bad interaction or I blow somebody off because I know that's not how I want to be treated. And a lot of times when I'm asking a question on another repo or I have a bug that I've taken the time to file, it's because I like the project enough that I want to see the thing fixed. I just may not know where exactly to go, or maybe it's in a language I'm not familiar with. So the fact that I've taken the time to file a bug and try to walk through with the maintainer about something I would like fixed or done already from my mind expresses that I like this project and I want it to succeed. I just may not have the ability to see it succeed myself. And then for the project to just close it as won't fix and say, go away, that would feel terrible for me. So I definitely don't like having those types of interactions with anyone else. At the same time, I have had to learn over the course of my career that there are some times where you have to say that this particular feature is not one that fits with this project, or this particular bug is not one that we can prioritize above existing bugs. However, we are open to pull requests, and I usually try to go that little bit of extra way and say, I'll even show you the particular code path that you're probably interested in, or it may require refactoring to this one section of the code to at least give them a little bit of a head start, because I like to have good interactions as well. I want someone to walk away from my project, with a smile, not feeling like I was a jerk.
And once they've invested themselves and shown an ability to listen to feedback and stuff, that at that point, assuming like project timelines allow it, that would be when I'd be prepared to invest more, right? Because they've shown that it's worth it. In terms of tooling and automation, I'm actually really keen on that, even if you are like a tightly knit project. And the reason why is because I think it basically gets some stuff out of the way so that you can do more human interaction, right? As opposed to like solving human problems with technology. It's like getting irrelevant stuff like code formatting out of the way so you've got more bandwidth for real human stuff.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing worse in the pull request than someone saying, hey, you indented by 4 spaces here and not 2.
I'm a really big advocate of not using technology to solve people problems, right? So like in terms of task management and stuff like that, I often feel like people build all this automation and it just makes life harder. But for things like code formatting or just one command that builds your project and you don't have to go and look it up, I'm really in favor of it.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Kolide. What do you call an endpoint security product that works perfectly but makes users miserable? A failure. The old approach to endpoint security is to lock down employee devices and roll out changes through forced restarts, but it just doesn't work. IT is miserable because they've got a mountain of support tickets, employees start using personal devices to get their work done, and executives opt out the first time it makes them late for a meeting. You can't have a successful security implementation unless you work with end users. That's where Kolide comes in. Their user-first device trust solution notifies users as soon as it detects an issue on their device and teaches them how to solve it without needing help from IT. That way, untrusted devices are blocked from authenticating, but users don't stay blocked. Kolide is designed for companies with Okta, and it works on macOS, Windows, Linux, and mobile devices. So if you have Okta and you're looking for a device trust solution that respects your team, support the show and go to kolide.com/LinuxDevTime to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/LinuxDevTime. Quick bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to linuxdevtime.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And you also get quite a lot of episodes a day or so early. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxdevtime.com.
So Andy, how do you on Element handle the difference between a company coming to Element for a particular feature or bug request versus an individual?
Yeah, that's interesting. Sometimes people from companies have different expectations. Sometimes they have a kind of an expectation on how much of your time you're going to dedicate to them. And sometimes there's a commercial relationship there and that expectation is reasonable. And sometimes there isn't. And sometimes you don't know which of those it is. So it's good to find out. Most of the work that I do at Element is donated to the Matrix Foundation. So I'm actually in a role there where I'm working for Element, but I'm also in a kind of steward role of the Open Matrix project. So I shouldn't be being biased when I'm working in that way towards people because of an Element commercial relationship. So that can affect how much time I spend on something, but not, for example, like decisions about what's best for the code base or the project. So it can get quite complicated.
Have you found that the commercial or company-based requests are more thorough, or like they're more willing to do some of the work because presumably that's what they're being paid to do? Or do you find it really no difference between them and individual contributors?
There's definitely a difference. And I think that there's a very wide range of how it can feel, right? So in the best scenario, I've given hints and then someone's gone off and done loads of work and sometimes even found ways of doing things that were outside of the code base just because it was kind of easier for them to make progress, but maybe that wasn't the right way. But the level of effort that they've put in is commendable. But I've also had experiences where people have come in and they've got the thing that they need to do for their boss by tomorrow and they're annoyed with you for not making it possible. And you're thinking about wider things about the quality of the code base and so on. So yeah, the broad range. But when it works well, I think it's really positive. People who are paid to code and have 8 hours of it in a day or however many, a full day of work can really make good progress and you can get a good working relationship going. Whereas if someone has only a little bit of time once a week, you can't send them off on a mission. You've got to give them really focused advice.
Yeah, I've had some pretty similar experiences as well. But probably one of the most difficult parts was on the projects for me that was a side project. It got the hours on nights and weekends, but then a company would come and want something done. And a lot of times they could dedicate more time to the problem than I could. And if they took the problem in a different direction or in a feature that I really didn't want to support, to me at least, I felt threatened is not quite the right word, but it felt threatening when it felt like a company could come in, swoop up my project, take it off in a different direction. And in this one instance that I'm thinking of that comes to mind very clearly, there were some engineers at Google. It was not a Google project that they were working on. It was just some engineers who happened to be from Google. But that felt very much like, wow, these people have a lot of time that they can dedicate, a lot of money. There's several people, and here I can dedicate an hour a night or so, and they could take this off and hold it different direction. And they have the resourcing of Google if they just wanted to swoop up this project and move on. So it felt very scary. I wanted to help and get their features landed or their bugs fixed. Eventually, though, in this particular instance, we ended up parting ways, and I ended up not implementing the thing that they wanted. And they actually did create a competing library. Right. I say competing. Not really competing. Complementary library. That's a great way to put it. And it turned out great because then that was actually a big weight off my shoulders that I could focus on the things that I wanted to focus on and they could focus on the one particular part that was important to them. And both libraries are flourishing. There's users of both, which I think is great in the end run.
That gives me an excuse to share a story I had as a volunteer contributor on a tiny little project, which was I was writing this little Python script called QDsync. I got annoyed with rsync because you had to know which direction you were syncing, like where the from and the to were. So I wrote this little thing called quick and dirty sync, which is a little Python script which just copies everything from both sides to the other side. So you never have to know which side is which. And then I got contacted by someone who just wanted to know whether any part of it had been written while I or anyone else was resident in Iran. Probably for like export.
Yeah.
You know, the US had this export policy thing, or I don't know. None of it had, but I refused to answer that question without being given more information. I felt a little bit nervous about who I was talking to then.
We talked about people who have not very much experience and need a lot of mentoring. But have you experienced people who have got loads of experience and think they're a 10x coder or whatever, and, you know, therefore don't need to fit in with you? You know, they're fixing your problems for you and you know, having an arrogance. Is it something you've experienced on your open source projects?
I don't think so. I think most people who are experienced programmers have been taught a great humility by how many times they've failed to understand or get something working. Or maybe it's just that your judgment of whether they're any good is based on whether they've understood your code and the way you do things. So I guess maybe those people might appear and I just wouldn't notice because I just think, oh, this isn't very good. And then they'd go away again.
I think I've had people show up and make large changes assumingly, as in they make a large change, make the PR, and just kind of assume that I will accept it right away. I've had that happen a few times. And then there's been some back and forth about, I don't think this fits, or that's not something I want to do, or it breaks this other particular use case. But that's probably been the most of it. I haven't had to deal with that too often, though, because most of the time, if you come back with actual hard evidence of this broke, or we don't want to do this because of X, they usually back down or have an answer to it.
I think I got a bit burnt really early on in my open source life when I was working on a TV guide, which still exists, by the way, called Free Guide. And at some point in the history of it, quite early on, someone came along, and it was one of the situations a bit like what Kevin was describing, where they had more time than me, and I was feeling guilty because I wasn't giving them good code reviews, and they were getting on making stuff work. And they were working on a feature that I really wanted, and it got almost all the way over the line, and we were ready to do a release, but I just wasn't happy that it was high enough quality, and it wasn't really working properly. And it just kind of all ground to a halt. And I ended up rolling back about 9 months of work and just making a release with just none of that in. And it felt terrible, and they went away, but it taught me that I should have done the reviews properly. And if I didn't have time, I should have just waited till I did have time. And if the pull requests were too big, I mean, they probably weren't pull requests, they were probably diffs by email. But anyway, if they were too big, I should have just sent them away and said, break that up into smaller stuff. I can't review it like this. I think part of it is like, you want to be a superstar. You want to like prove that you're so smart. You can read this like 1,000-line pull request and understand it. And you just can't. So I think I learned early on, you've got to send people away and say, this needs to be consumable by me if it's going to get into this project, because that is the criterion.
I had somebody that they don't know that they were a mentor to me, but I used to follow a lot of what they did. They were very prolific in the Rust community, still are actually. And I used to follow a lot of their work, and watching how they interacted with the community that they had built up around their projects really, really helped me. And they were really good about that, and being very respectful and very kind, but also very direct in saying, I need to be able to review this in my time. I needed to follow these guidelines. That's not a feature I'm interested in. They would close things down very quickly. But that also led to much higher quality code later on, and they have never suffered for contributions. So that taught me pretty early on, you can say no, you can set some of the standards, and that has definitely helped as I've gone forward.
And it definitely is part of the craft of programming to be able to break your stuff up into logical bits that can be reviewed and understood piece by piece.
Absolutely. I think that's a part that a lot of developers either don't consciously think of, but a huge section of the job is not just communicating to the machine in instructions, but also communicating to other developers why a particular change is necessary or why a particular change in a particular manner is necessary. So it's those communication skills with other developers that are so critical in being able to express and articulate your ideas well to those around you is so key.
Absolutely. Which is why I try not to feel guilty about pushing back on someone and saying this needs to be done a different way, because that is actually building their skills that they need to be able to do this.
Well, it's been absolutely great talking to you again, Andy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.